Lord is the consciousness that exists for itself, but no longer merely the notion of such a consciousness. Rather, it is a consciousness existing for itself, which is mediated with itself through another consciousness. That is, through a consciousness whose nature it is to be bound up with an existence that is independent, or thinghood in general. The Lord puts himself into relation with both of these moments to a thing as such, the object of desire, and to the consciousness for which thinghood is the essential characteristic. And since he is, A, qua the notion of self-consciousness, an immediate relation of being for self, but B, is now at the same time mediation, or a being for self which is for itself only through another, he is related A, immediately to both, and B, mediatedly to each through the other. The Lord relates himself mediatedly to the bondsman through a being, a thing that is independent. For it is just this which holds the bondsman in bondage. It is his chain from which he could not break free in the struggle, thus proving himself to be dependent, to possess his independence and thinghood. But the Lord is the power over this thing, for he proved in the struggle that it is something merely negative. Since he is the power over this thing, and this again is the power over the other, it follows that he holds the other in subjection. Equally, the Lord relates himself mediatedly to the thing through the bondsman. The bondsman, qua self-consciousness in general, also relates himself negatively to the thing and takes away its independence. But at the same time, the thing is independent vis-a-vis the bondsman, whose negating of it therefore cannot go the length of being altogether done with to the point of annihilation. In other words, he only works on it. For the Lord, on the other hand, the immediate relation becomes, through this mediation, the sheer negation of the thing, or the enjoyment of it. What desire has failed to achieve, he succeeds in doing. That is, to have done with the thing altogether and to achieve satisfaction in the enjoyment of it. Desire failed to do this because of the thing's independence, but the Lord, who has interposed the bondsman between it and himself, takes to himself only the dependent aspect of the thing and has the pure enjoyment of it. The aspect of its independence he leaves to the bondsman who works on it. As we proceed now into paragraph 190, which is a very important turning point, we are entering the master-slave dialectic proper. That is, we are now seeing the determinate configuration of the relationship between the master, or the Lord, the Herr, and the slave, the bondsman, the Knecht in German. And you notice I've got this triadic schema up here, which Hegel is working through in this paragraph, and which is going to be absolutely central for the rest of what is going to develop. I also have some examples of different ways in which the master can put the slave to work, different types of objects or fields in which the slave is going to be doing something productive. And I think that it can be useful for us to think about how these might themselves play out in relation to this schema. So Hegel says the Lord is the consciousness that exists for itself. It's self-consciousness existing for itself. Remember, it's gone through this struggle to the death with the other self-consciousness who gave in, who was unwilling to sacrifice or even to fully risk its life, and therefore ended up trembling, ended up giving in, ended up not going all the way. The master was willing to depart from this life, willing to put their life entirely on the line, and as a result was able to now reap the benefits of the relationship that this is going to afford to them. So he says the Lord is the consciousness that exists for itself. It's no longer just the notion of such self-consciousness. All the development that we've been seeing self-consciousness go through up until this point has been working through this notion, this begriff of what it means to be a self-consciousness. Hegel, by the way, is not saying that all of self-consciousness or all of spirit fits into master and slave, but this is an essential moment in the development that's taking place. So now we're seeing self-consciousness become concrete. That is, it takes a determinate form. we could think of this as, the many different cultures that have had relations of slavery or of servitude. That is a determinate shape where you have a master and you have a slave, but even more importantly, you also have things upon which the slaves work. If you don't have this third term in the picture, none of this is going to really matter. So he says, it's a consciousness that exists for itself, which is mediated with itself through another consciousness. So the master is in fact mediated through the servant, through the slave. The master, doesn't have absolute existence in and for him or herself as something totally out there, totally independent. The way that servitude has been depicted in other philosophers who talked about this might have given that impression. For example, when Aristotle talks about slavery in Politics Book 1, which I've referenced already before, he talks about the master as somebody who is existing or who has their being on their own. They are, in Hegelian terms, for themselves. Aristotle thinks about it just in terms of a kind of independence. And the slave is, like Hegel's going to say, dependent. The slave is literally for, in Aristotle's terms, pros, in relation to the master. They don't have their human being, their distinctively human being, in the way that the master does. So, let's go on. He says, it's mediated with itself through another consciousness. That is, through a consciousness whose nature is to be bound up with an existence that is independent or with thinghood in general. So the master does have a relationship to things, to thinghood, to this entire range and environment of things that are not self-consciousness, things that are not themselves human. But the master has their relationship to those things in a different way than the slave does. The slave is the go-between, the one who is going to do things for the master, who is going to work on things for the master, who's going to change them, who's going to put them into a different state, which the master then can consume. So, if we go on from there, he says, the Lord puts himself into relation with both of these moments. And you notice I've got all these arrows drawn here. The Lord really is the center of things. The master is the one who is determinative, who sets the agenda, so to speak. And you might say, well, they're not really setting the agenda because it's just their desires that are doing so, or instincts, or whatever you like. But as far as Hegel is concerned, at this point, it's the Lord with whom the initiative of the dialectical process is residing with. The Lord, like I said, sets the agenda. The Lord decides what things the slave is going to work upon and sets the slave into motion. Again, it can be useful here to think in terms of Aristotle's classic treatment of slavery. He calls the slave we might translate it as a tool that possesses a soul. And what that means, it's a tool, it's an organon that possesses an internal principle of self-motion. It requires the master to actually decide for the slave what that shape of motion is going to look like. But the slave does have an aspect of independence. The slave is a human being. The slave is a self-consciousness. And without those kind of tools, Aristotle thought, we really can't get the things that we need done. This is why Aristotle thought that slavery was, in a certain respect, natural. Of course, the way that he understood natural slavery would actually preclude much of the historical forms that slavery has taken, because you have to have a master who actually deserves to be a master. And the slave can't just be some poor schmuck who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, like a war captive. Aristotle talks about why war captives shouldn't be slaves. The slave has to be somebody for whom it actually is to their benefit to be in a position where somebody else is calling the shots, where somebody else, the Greek term for that is archein, that we translate as to rule, but it can also mean to determine, to decide. So when we think about it this way, the slave is in this position where the master is organizing the world in which both of them live. So he goes on and he says, the Lord puts himself into relation with both of these moments to a thing as such, the thing that they want, which is the object of desire. And we saw that desire played a very important role in self-consciousness. Self-consciousness, in a certain way, is desire. The Lord wants things out of the big wide world, and the Lord is going to get those things, but the Lord is going to get those not by himself or herself immediately pursuing them or working upon them, but by making another self-consciousness do that work for them. So he says the Lord puts himself into relationship with the thing and to the consciousness for which thinghood is the essential characteristic. Now, why is thinghood the essential characteristic for the slave? Here's where we ought to think quite a bit about something going beyond the mere property relation. You know, in certain conceptions of servitude, the slave has been understood as a piece of property. The thing itself is understood as the property of the Lord. You know, there are sort of labor theories of value that can work out this part. And Hegel is getting to something even more basic than that. He's saying that the person who's stuck in the role of being the slave, the servant, the bondsman, the Knecht in Hegel's German, is in a position where they are in effect being treated as a thing and also being treated as not a thing. Or if you like, they're being treated as a thing taken to a higher power. A thing that is able to do what other things cannot do. Here again, it's useful to think about Aristotle. Aristotle had this passage that I've brought up before where he talks about, you know, we're going to need slaves until we have tools that can run themselves. So if we had shuttles that could weave by themselves, if we had other things that would do their own work, we wouldn't need slaves to do all that work. Hegel is approaching this idea, but sort of from the other side of it. He's saying it's in the nature of this relationship. It's not in the nature of the slave as slave, but it's in the nature of slave as social role within this whole matrix, to be the one who can work upon the thing, who can translate the will of the master into actuality. So this is all, very interesting and very important, but what does this lead to? He says, since he's talking about the master, qua the notion of self-consciousness, an immediate relation of being for self, but now is at the same time mediation or being for self who is only through another, he is related immediately to both. That's why I drew these arrows here, immediately to both. The master is the one who not only owns, but determines the world, determines the way in which things are going to be for the slave, a person who's being understood in a thingly way, and for the thing, the non-personal objects of desire, and for the master of enjoyment as well. So he goes on and he says he's related immediately to both, but also mediately to both through the other. So it's not just that the thing is related to the master through the slave. That is also a case, right? But the slave is related to the master through the thing. The slave only exists as slave if the slave is being set to do some kind of work that the master himself or herself would prefer not to do and would like to reap the benefits of, or cull off the cream, so to speak. So this is a very important point. It's not just that you have an object here which the master wants to have some sort of relation to, and the slave is a means to that. The very meaning of the slave as a social role, as a position that a person can occupy, is being provided by the thing. This looks ahead to the passages that are yet to come, where it's going to turn out that the thing is going to be what allows the slave to have a kind of consciousness, an understanding of self-consciousness, that the master himself or herself will not actually enjoy. So, he says, the Lord relates himself mediately to the bondsman through a being, a thing that is independent. The thing that they want is independent of our human desires. It's part of our human world, but it's there as something that's not human, as an object for us. So here's where it can actually be useful to think about these examples. So the thing, in terms of food production, we'll think about agriculture, right? You have a field. First, the field has to be plowed. Who's going to do the plowing? It's not going to be the master. The master might supervise, right? But the master is not going to get his or her hands dirty with that kind of muck. Who's going to cultivate the field? Who's going to plant the seeds? Who's going to do the work of weeding it? Who is going to bring in the harvest? Who is going to do whatever processing has to be done? You know, think about grain. Grain, you have to get rid of the bran or the husks, and then you have just the seeds that you want. Other things have to be stored in certain ways. They have to be preserved. Many foodstuffs have to be cooked in certain ways. All of that is taking the thing, which is an object of desire for both the slave and the master, qua human beings, and having the slave work upon them so the master can do it. What about manufacturing? There we've got a more involved kind of process where you're taking something. A good example of this would be in the ancient world. They discovered that if you heated up sand in the right ways, you could actually produce glass. And glass was something that was a high-value item. It wasn't great glass compared to the stuff that we can now do today, but it was pretty cool nonetheless. And for that, you need people who are going to go out and do what we call the grunt work. Sit around in a hot area, shovel sand, work with these things that can be sometimes dangerous. Within a household, household management is, the Greek word for that is what we get the word economy from, oikonomike. And many servants were set to tasks within a household. In our modern culture today, our essentially postmodern culture, late modern culture, we don't have an awful lot of servants unless we're rich, but we might hire a cleaning service to come in. And if you think about what a cleaning service is actually supposed to be doing, it's producing a kind of order among the disorder that we tend to produce as human beings just by living in an area or working in an area. Janitorial staff coming into a workplace at night, usually when everybody else is away, are producing a kind of order that's similar to that in a household. There's all sorts of other things, the food production and manufacturing can roll into household as well. Much of that was done within the household in ancient societies. But there are some things that are occurring that are distinctive to the domestic sphere. Then think about entertainment and pleasure. If we have musicians, musicians have not always enjoyed a high social status. As a matter of fact, the celebrity status that we accord to musicians is something relatively new, and it's not accorded to most musicians. Try going into a place and just playing on open mic night, and you'll see that you don't really matter all that much, except insofar as you as a producer can give pleasure to your audience. In that case, I don't want to say in every case it's master-slave dialectic for audiences and performers, but there is something like that going on within this setting. So, in all of these cases, what we have is that the Lord relates himself mediately to the bondsman through a thing that is independent. Now, this thing is what holds, he says, the bondsman, the slave, in their servitude. It is the fact that they have to work that puts them in the position that they are, and that they have to work on the object. they become defined in terms of the object upon which they are working. And if they do this for long enough, they may come to identify their entire self-consciousness with the kind of producer or the kind of worker which they are. I am just a peasant. I produce food. I am just a guild manufacturer. I produce glass or produce, whatever else, woven fabrics. I am just a household servant. I tidy things up. I make sure that everything is in its proper place. I respond to the requirements of the master or the mistress of the house. I am an entertainer. I am here to provide pleasure in a certain way that I've learned how to do, using instruments, working upon things. So he goes on and he says, it's the chain from which he could not break free in the struggle. And don't worry so much about the chain. The chain is just the first of the things that the slave encounters. The slave encounters the entire world of things upon which he or she must work. And he says, this proves him to be dependent, to possess his independence in thinghood. So the slave is in this very ambiguous position. Insofar as he's dependent, he is dependent upon the Lord, upon the master. The master is, like I said, setting the agenda, determining what he's going to work upon. Insofar as he's independent, he is independent in the way that a thing is. Insofar as he resists the master, insofar as he requires some tutelage, insofar as he requires some disciplining, whatever it is that's going to be, that resists the rule of the master, he is independent. But he's independent only like the world of the things upon which he works. So the stable boy does not sleep with everybody else. The stable boy sleeps in the stable. And that's a sign, sort of index, of the fact that he belongs there for the masters. So he goes on and he says, the Lord is the power over this thing. Why? Now, it's not just that the Lord happens to have been born in the right class, or the Lord was in the right place at the right time, or he bopped somebody on the head and, produced them as a slave. He got the drop on them. Rather, it's that the Lord, and this is what might make us give pause about who might actually be a Lord and who might not. Again, think about Aristotle. The true master is pretty rare. The master in this case is the one who has been willing to risk death. And being willing to risk death meant that while having a relationship of desire to the whole world of things, the master was also willing to dispense with them, to say, I'm going to give those up. I'm going to take the chance that I'm not even going to be around to enjoy them, because that's how much having self-certainty, knowing who I am, gaining recognition, that's how much it matters to me. So the Lord is, in a certain respect, this is going to be a very flowery way of expressing it, somebody who has a kind of metaphysical faith, or hope rather. They are willing to go to the limit because they think there may be something beyond it, and this relationship is what turns out to be beyond it. So he says, he is the power over this thing, and this again is the power over the other. It follows that he holds the other in subjection. Equally, the Lord relates himself, this is very important, mediatively to the thing through the bondsman. So now we see this part of the mediation going on. The Lord doesn't have a direct relationship to the thing in its entirety, in all of its dimensions. In any of these examples, the Lord only knows part of what's going on. Now, the Lords are the one who write the history, who get to decide what counts as what and all that. But that means that there's an epistemological uncertainty here that is going to be explored through the rest of the work. So he says the bondsman, as self-consciousness in general, also relates himself negatively to the thing. Takes away its independence. How does he take away the independence of the thing? Well, again, let's think about these examples. agriculture or food production. You're taking the thing and you're making it do something that it might, have some inclinations to do. You plant a seed, and the seed does want to sprout, but that seed didn't necessarily want to sprout in that furrow so that you could then harvest it later on, right? That's not part of the inherent teleology of a chickpea seed. Chickpeas were one of the early cultivated foodstuffs in the Mediterranean area. So the same thing with manufacturing. You take sand. That sand does not by itself want to be glass, let alone be a glass bottle in this shape, colored a certain color, and then shipped over here or given to this particular owner or master or procurer. The slave is taking the things of nature and the things of culture and making them obey their own will. But it's not just the will of the slave, right? Because it's the master, like I said, who is determining things, who is deciding what things the slave is going to work upon. So the thing does have both independent and dependent aspects to it. And this is part of what we want to explore as we go through the rest of this passage. He says, he takes away the independence of the thing, but the thing is still independent with respect to the bondsman. His negating of it cannot go the length of being altogether done with it to the point of annihilation. He works on it. So although, in the fields, perhaps the slave steals a few apples or eats some of the peas that are growing. I remember as a child, my mother was constantly getting on us. We had to do weeding in the garden. I'm not saying my mother was a master and I was a slave, by the way. But we had a communal garden for the family, and we had to do weeding. And, we had only certain times that we'd eat during the day. We didn't get a lot of snacks. And sweet peas are indeed very sweet. So we would pick them, and we'd also take green beans and yellow beans, and we'd eat them. And then we'd get yelled at, right? Same thing when we'd go and pick berries, like blackberries or blueberries. We'd be told, look, we're picking these so that we can actually do something with them, not so that you can just stuff your face and enjoy yourself in the moment with them as the person who's doing the work. We were actually going to can most of it. Now, the slave doesn't get to do an awful lot of that. They don't have the same relationship of enjoyment that the master does with respect to the object. Instead, what they do is they work upon it. The German for that is bearbeitet. Arbeit is work, That's the labor that you do, that you invest in things. The slave belabors, the cognate actually works here, belabors the thing to transform it into something for the master, into a product. So he says the slave is not actually able to do what the master gets to do, what self-consciousness would like to do with the thing. He doesn't get to enjoy it. He works upon it. The Lord, he says, by contrast, enjoys the thing. He says the immediate relation becomes, through this mediation, the sheer negation of the thing. Why does Hegel consider enjoyment a negation? That's an interesting question to bring up. Well, when you are enjoying something, for the most part, you are making it other than what it is. You are consuming it in the process. With food, this is very simple, right? You eat the food. You taste the food. The food items are very interesting because even if they are works of art, they're works of art that only do the work of that an artwork does if you actually eat them up. And then it's gone. And then somebody else can't do it. You can take as many, shots as you like and put it on Instagram, but the picture of the food is not the same thing as the food, right? Presentation is only part of it. Flavor, you only get by putting it in your mouth and eating it. Or I suppose, with modernist cuisine, they deconstruct things. There's a whole conversation that can be had there. But you get the idea. The master treats the thing in a negative relation. But interestingly, the master doesn't grasp the whole of the thing. They only grasp the dependent aspect of the thing. It's the servant who encounters the independent aspect of the thing, And they do so precisely by having to run into it, by having to work upon it, by having to deal with it, as we say, in the workplace. So there's a bifurcation in the knowledge or the experience that's being had between that of the master and slave. He says, what desire failed to achieve, the master succeeds in doing, to have done with the thing altogether. Only to have done with the dependent aspect of it, though. To achieve satisfaction in the enjoyment of it. But this is a momentary satisfaction. This is not a satisfaction that is going to last forever, as we're going to see in the subsequent paragraphs. It says, desire failed to do this because of the thing's independence. The world resists us. The world is independent of us. But the Lord has taken to himself only the dependent aspect by having the bondsman, the slave, who is actually able to separate these aspects out. Hegel doesn't use that terminology, but that's something that we need to read into this. He says, the bondsman is interposed between the thing and the master. So the master takes to himself only the dependent aspect of the thing and has the pure enjoyment of it. The aspect of its independence he leaves to the bondsman who works upon it. So again, like I just said, we have a splitting that's taking place within consciousness in relation to the thing, which isn't just a thing, it's an entire world of things. So the question that we want to keep in mind as we're going forward is, who is really grasping reality more? The master, who seems to be, enjoying the best of everything right now, or is it the slave?